At our divorce hearing, he showed up with his lover, only to discover I was his boss. Rachel Summers sat quietly in the courtroom, hands folded tightly in her lap. The soft murmur of the anxious crowd and the tapping of heels on the polished floor seemed distant to her, a world away from the turmoil swirling inside her mind. For years, she had poured every ounce of her energy into building Novapulse from a modest startup into one of the leading technology firms in the country. Today, as CEO, she commanded millions in revenue and led a team of some of the brightest minds in the industry. Yet here she was, feeling exposed and small, awaiting a divorce hearing that was anything but simple. Her marriage to Michael Turner had been a complicated chapter, one marked by condescension and bitter misunderstandings. When they met, Rachel had been just starting her career, eager and ambitious. Michael, always sure of himself, had dismissed her drive as naivete, nothing more than youthful brashness. Over the years, his arrogance choked the partnership they once dreamed of building. He genuinely believed his own talents far exceeded hers. The final straw came when he outright mocked her work ethic and achievements at social gatherings, humiliating her in front of friends, colleagues, even their own families. Rachel's pride and dignity hung in the balance. She decided she could no longer subject herself to that toxic environment, but the fight ahead was proving to be harsher than she imagined. The heavy oak doors at the end of the hall opened with a crisp thud. All eyes turned as Michael entered, his tall frame exuding a false confidence that gripped the room's attention. But he wasn't alone. Draped effortlessly over his arm was Chloe, a striking young woman whose bright smile and flashy designer handbag screamed influencer and attention seeker. She moved with a deliberate ease, drawing the gaze of half the courtroom, some with veiled judgment, others with curious glances. Michael's smirk widened as he pulled the seat beside Rachel empty, a subtle yet pointed statement of possession and control. Rachel's jaw clenched, but she refused to meet their eyes. The air around her thickened with a silent humiliation. Chloe's laughter, light and mocking, cut through the tense atmosphere when she leaned just close enough to whisper, "Can you believe Rachel's actually the boss of the same company Michael works for? Guess things really didn't turn out the way she thought." The venom in her voice was unmistakable, draining Rachel of warmth and igniting a fire of quiet rage. For years, Rachel had hidden this truth, shielding her role at Novapulse from prying eyes to avoid awkwardness in their fragile, unraveling personal life. But now, in this public forum, surrounded by legal counsel and family, that secret was dangerously close to exposure. She knew that revealing her position would shatter the condescending image Michael had tried to build about her lightweight status. Yet it also put her at risk for backlash among those who refused to see women in authority. As the judge called the hearing to order, Rachel's heartbeat quickened. This wasn't just about signed papers or legal blame. It was about reclaiming her honor in a world eager to doubt her worth. She straightened her spine, her gaze steady and unwavering, preparing herself to face the final battle, one where humility and strength would collide, where humiliation might transform into unexpected vindication. The room seemed to hold its breath, sensing that this divorce hearing was no ordinary legal proceeding, but a stage for a lesson far beyond separation. Michael caught Rachel's eye for a brief moment and grinned, a sneer masked as a confident look, completely unaware of the storm about to unfold. For the first time in years, Rachel wasn't going to be the quiet, underestimated woman in his shadow. This day, she would silently vow, would be different. The courtroom tension thickened as the hearing began, but Rachel could hardly focus on the judge's formal voice or the legal jargon rattling around the room. Instead, her mind replayed Chloe's smug whisper, stirring a knot of humiliation deep in her chest. The crude public display of Michael's new relationship had pierced her carefully constructed armor, exposing a vulnerability she worked tirelessly to conceal. Her cheeks burned, though she remained still, eyes forward, every muscle clenched in silent defiance. Michael, meanwhile, seemed to revel in the spectacle. His chuckles, exchanged with his new partner, echoed faintly like a taunt. It was as if he wore his arrogance as armor, convinced that Rachel's fall from grace was all but guaranteed. In his mind, his success came from talent and confidence, the very elements he derided her for lacking. To him, she was still the struggling woman from years ago, trying to fake her way through a world she'd never truly belonged to. The subtle power play at the hearing was his way of cementing that illusion in front of everyone who mattered. Yet behind closed doors, Rachel's wounds ran deeper than bruised pride. The years of being talked down to, overtly dismissed, and unappreciated had left scars that no title or paycheck could erase. Every time Michael belittled her efforts, cast doubt on her skills, or insulted her passion, it made her question if she deserved her place. How many times had she bitten her tongue just to keep the peace? How often had she swallowed her anger, convincing herself that success would be the ultimate answer? Now, as her personal and professional life threatened to collide, all those questions echoed louder than ever. She barely noticed the growing murmurs among the crowd. Whispers rippled as relatives and colleagues exchanged looks, sensing the undercurrents beneath the polite proceedings. Some eyes held sympathy, others disbelief. The contrast between Rachel's poised figure and the drama unfolding in her personal life sparked an involuntary empathy in bystanders. No one liked seeing a woman who had fought so hard for respect be so publicly undermined. Deep down, Rachel hoped her story might strike a chord in others facing their own quiet battles. Through the haze of humiliation, a flicker of determination started to bloom. This could not be the story she told about herself. She owed herself more than to be a casualty of Michael's petty games or Chloe's insults. Somewhere, deep beneath the sting, a seed of resilience grew, driving her to hold firm, even when her heart threatened to give way. It was in these moments, the hardest moments, that true strength was tested. As the judge called upon their lawyers to present arguments, Rachel's attorney prepared to reveal something that would change the course of the hearing. Not a bombshell based on lies or bitterness, but an undeniable truth rooted in Rachel's real power, her status as Michael's direct superior at Nova Pulse. For years, that fact had been quietly shielded from public view. Michael, intoxicated by his own ego, had never expected this knowledge to surface here, in front of witnesses who could redefine the narrative forever. This was not just about proving a point in a courtroom. It was a battle for dignity, a stand against the shadow of underestimation that had clung to Rachel for so long. And as those words prepared to cut through the tension, Rachel silently hoped that others would listen close, that anyone who ever felt trapped by their own humiliation might find courage in her fight. If you've ever felt underestimated or unfairly judged, here's a reminder: strength often lies in the quiet refusal to be diminished. Stay with Rachel's journey. See how resilience can transform even the darkest moments into a powerful story of reclaiming respect. After the initial shock of Chloe's presence and Michael's smug display, Rachel tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the concrete ahead. She knew the hours ahead would stretch long and cruel, each moment another test of resolve. The courtroom's somber walls closed in around her as Michael's legal team opened their case, painting a picture of a man wronged, rejected, and burdened by a marriage that failed purely because of personal differences. The words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they twisted reality, ignoring the years of condescension and dismissiveness Rachel had endured quietly. Rachel's own attorney urged patience. "We'll get the truth out," he whispered during a brief recess. Though she appreciated his calm assurance, Rachel couldn't shake the weight of the humiliation pressing down on her. The public nature of the hearing made each accusation, each insinuation all the more invasive. Every whispered comment from the gallery, every sideways glance, seemed to magnify her pain. It wasn't just about Michael's disdain anymore. It was the unspoken judgment of everyone watching. Trying to deflect her spiraling emotions, Rachel dove into preparation, reviewing her evidence and retracing her steps. Yet even here, she faced subtle obstacles. Michael's team painted her as cold and controlling, manipulating her role as CEO to ostracize Michael and hide weaknesses in their marriage. Some colleagues, when indirectly questioned, hesitated to testify in Rachel's favor, caught between workplace loyalty and social repercussions. The layers of resistance made the battle feel uphill and lonely. Still, amid the chaos, sting, and setbacks, brief glimmers of hope appeared. Small moments during breaks offered Rachel space to breathe, connect with her attorney, and reaffirm her purpose. Her determination wasn't rooted in vengeance, but in reclaiming her dignity and the truth about her worth. She remembered the long nights building Nova Pulse, each line as code she'd overseen, each decision that had pushed the company forward. Those victories belonged to her no matter what the courtroom said. During one tense afternoon session, a quiet but supportive nod from a trusted colleague in the audience reminded Rachel she was not invisible. Others at Nova Pulse had witnessed her talent, leadership, and integrity, qualities that no divorce hearing could erase. That realization stirred a flicker of courage she desperately needed. Yet, progress came in fits and starts. Some witnesses faltered under pressure. Some arguments backfired, fueling Michael's smug confidence. Rachel found herself trapped in a limbo between hope and frustration. At night, doubt crept in with quiet menace, whispering that maybe the world was right to underestimate her. Still, she held on to a fragile thread of belief. The truth wasn't just a weapon to wield in court. It was a beacon she would carry outside those walls. It was the reminder that humility didn't mean surrender, and being underestimated could be the quiet fuel to ignite a powerful comeback. If you've ever felt stuck in a situation where your true value was ignored or dismissed, remember Rachel's journey. Sometimes the path to overcoming external doubt involves first confronting the storm within. Stay close. Real breakthroughs often arrive when despair begins to wane. The days of the hearing dragged on, but today's session was different. The courtroom felt heavier, the air thick with an almost electric tension. Rachel sat rigid in her chair as Michael's attorney, sensing their advantage, launched a barrage of biting accusations, twisting her intentions, questioning her character, and painting her as a vindictive force behind the failed marriage. The smirks from Michael and Chloe were like knives, each one slicing deeper into Rachel's already bruised spirit. The moment Chloe slipped in a humiliating comment, loud enough for everyone to hear, cut sharper than any argument. "Guess Rachel really loves ordering people around," she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt as she glanced pointedly at Michael. The courtroom erupted quietly into stifled laughter and whispers, the kind that fills a room with an uncomfortable humiliation. Rachel's face flushed with heat, shame sinking deep as she felt the sting of being mocked, not just by a stranger, but by someone who had invaded her life with purpose. Her hands trembled slightly, barely noticeable, as she gripped the edge of the table. The realization that people, colleagues, even some friends, were absorbing Chloe's ridicule without defending her, left Rachel feeling isolated and, unfathomably, small. This was her lowest moment. She had envisioned countless endings for this divorce hearing, but never one where her strength and achievements would be trampled so shamelessly beneath an overconfident young woman's laughter. For a fleeting moment, Rachel's thoughts teetered dangerously between fragile hope and crushing despair. The protective walls she'd built around herself, the proud CEO who'd faced down every challenge at Novapulse, seemed to crumble into dust. Michael's smug expression confirmed a cruel victory he believed was already his. But as the judge called for order and silence swept over the room, a quiet voice inside Rachel whispered, this wasn't where her story ended. The humiliation, as raw as it felt, was not the sum of her worth. It was the crucible forging a different kind of power, one that came not from paycheck or title, but from an unyielding spirit refusing to be broken. Her lawyer's nod, firm and reassuring, gave Rachel the strength to meet that challenge head-on. They prepared to reveal something none of them expected, a fact that could transform the hearing and turn the tables on Michael's arrogance. Every heartbeat in Rachel's chest felt like a countdown. The moment of change was close. This was the valley before the mountain, a desperate, daunting silence before a breakthrough. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as the entire courtroom held its breath alongside her. If you faced a moment where the world seemed to mock your efforts and reduce you to less than you are, know this. That moment can be a turning point. Sometimes, it's when we are pushed to our lowest that the greatest transformation begins. Watch as Rachel's story reveals how the deepest humiliation can be the catalyst for something extraordinary. Amelia sat alone in the dim light of her cramped apartment, the weight of everything pressing down on her chest like a stone. Each rejection, every sharp whisper, and humiliating glance had piled up over the past weeks, suffocating her with its relentless presence. She stared at the untouched laptop screen before her, the cursor blinking mockingly, daring her to face the world again. The emails from her office, some curt, others outright dismissive, echoed in her mind. She felt invisible in a room full of people, a mistake that everyone seemed eager to highlight. Tears welled up, blurring the words of a particularly cruel message from a coworker who had once seemed friendly. The sting was unbearable. But beneath that pain, something fragile yet persistent flickered inside her. A faint ember of hope she hadn't been able to extinguish, no matter how hard the world tried. The next morning, Amelia forced herself to dress and step into the sunlit streets of the city. The familiar hum of life around her was deafening, but also oddly comforting. As she made her way to the small bookstore she'd frequented since college, she reflected on one thing that still brought warmth to her heart: her love of stories, tales of resilience, of ordinary people overcoming impossible odds. Maybe if she could immerse herself in those narratives, she might find a guide out of her own despair. Pushing open the bookstore door, she was greeted by a soft chime and the comforting scent of aged paper. The store's owner, a kindly older woman named Rose, noticed the heaviness in her eyes immediately. Without pressing, Rose offered Amelia a quiet smile and a steaming cup of tea, a small gesture of kindness that made Amelia's throat tighten. Over the next few visits, Amelia found herself drawn into conversations about books that echoed her own experiences, stories about courage, dignity, and reclaiming one's voice. Rose even lent her a worn copy of a memoir written by a woman who faced public ridicule but rose to become a community leader. Amelia clung to those words like lifelines, discovering reflections of her own pain, but also pathways through it. At the same time, Amelia began noticing faint cracks in the armor of those who had tormented her. The colleagues who once sneered were now visibly unsettled. Rumors circulated quietly about unethical behavior some of her detractors had engaged in, secrets no manager wished to confront. The news stirred something inside Amelia, a cautious sense that injustice might not only be hers to bear. It hinted at a chance for balance if she could find the strength to speak up. Late one evening, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Standing there was Jordan, a former teammate from an office project who had quietly observed the group's cruelty but had never intervened. His eyes held a mixture of regret and determination. "I've heard things," he confessed lowly. "People are tired of the underhanded tactics. If you're willing, I want to help you gather proof, to stand up, not just for you, but for everyone who's been pushed down unfairly." Amelia's heart accelerated. Could this be the turning point she had hoped for but never dared to expect? The path ahead was daunting, filled with uncertainty, but for the first time in weeks, she no longer felt utterly alone. A tentative smile broke through her guarded expression as she invited Jordan in. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter, a fragile but potent alliance fueled by shared pain and the resolve to uncover the truth. While the road to redemption remained unclear, Amelia felt the stirrings of courage bloom quietly within her, a whisper against the storm of humiliation that had threatened to consume her. If you've ever felt crushed by unfair judgment, remember, sometimes the smallest gestures and unlikely friendships can light the way forward. Keep listening for those whispers of hope. They might just lead you to the strength you need. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of quiet determination and careful planning. Amelia and Jordan met in secret, poring over emails, overheard conversations, and subtle hints that revealed the dark undercurrents running through their workplace. Every document they uncovered felt like a spark, igniting a fire that had been smoldering beneath the surface for far too long. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, turning the sky a bruised purple, Amelia sat across from Jordan in a small cafe, her hands trembling slightly as she held a folder thick with evidence. The usual noise faded into the background as she focused on the weight of what they'd assembled. A dossier exposing the manipulations, deliberate rumor-mongering, and discriminatory decisions that had poisoned their office environment. Jordan leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "This is it, Amelia. This is what will change everything. When we present this to HR, and if that doesn't work, to the board, it will be impossible for them to ignore." But Amelia's mind fluttered with doubt. Could she really stand up after everything? The scorn, the isolation, the relentless whispers? But now armed with truth, her heart ached from the fear of being dismissed once again, or worse, retaliated against. Yet beneath the fear flickered a resilient flame. This was more than personal now. It was about justice for herself and those who had been ripped down quietly. On the day they decided to confront the powers that be, Amelia arrived early. The office felt colder somehow, the usual hustle replaced by an uneasy silence, as if the walls themselves sensed an impending upheaval. Jordan stood by her side, his presence a steady anchor. As Amelia presented their findings to the HR director and the senior managers, voices that were once sharp with mockery and disdain softened with disbelief. Faces that had sneered at her trembled with exposure. Whispers turned into awkward silences as the magnitude of the evidence left the room heavy with tension. One of her fiercest critics, a woman who had orchestrated much of the humiliation, sat rigid, her confidence shattered. Attempts to downplay their accusations crumbled under the relentless clarity of Amelia's facts and calm resolve. The ripple effects were immediate. Internal investigations launched, apologies surfaced where silence had reigned, and for the first time, Amelia felt a cautious respect bubbling from some of her colleagues. No longer was she the invisible target, but a catalyst for overdue change. Outside the office, news of the scandal began to spread. Amelia found herself an unexpected hero in whispers throughout the building. Some stopped to offer a nod of recognition, others kept their distance, wary of the shift in power. Yet most astonishing was the message she received from a junior employee she barely knew, thanking her for the courage to speak out, someone who had suffered quietly for years. Despite the progress, Amelia remained humble, aware that the fight wasn't over. She knew healing, both hers and the company's, would take time. But for the first time, she met her reflection in the mirror, not with shame, but with quiet pride. This turning point reminded her and all who watched that sometimes the most powerful victories come from steadfast truth and unexpected allies. When we dare to confront darkness with courage and clarity, the tides of injustice can begin to turn. If you're wrestling with unfair battles in your own life, remember that you don't have to face them alone. Reach out, seek those who quietly stand with you. Together, even the most daunting challenges become conquerable. The days that followed the revelation felt surreal for Amelia. The burden that had weighed on her shoulders for months began to lift incrementally, replaced by a cautious optimism. The internal investigation moved swiftly, shining harsh light on the toxic culture that had allowed deception and cruelty to fester unchecked. Amelia watched as her antagonists, the very individuals who had tormented her relentlessly, were subjected to scrutiny they could no longer evade. One afternoon, a meeting was called in the bright, glass-walled conference room that had once felt like a cage. Amelia sat front and center, her posture steady but her heart pounding beneath her calm facade. Members of the board spoke openly, acknowledging the failings, promising systemic change, and most importantly, affirming a commitment to dignity and respect for every employee. The woman who had been Amelia's harshest tormentor now faced consequences she had long dodged: a formal suspension and mandatory participation in anger management and sensitivity training. Her icy glare softened into something almost bitter, a bitter recognition that power wielded through fear was no longer invincible. Colleagues who had turned a blind eye began to approach Amelia with genuine apologies. These encounters were awkward, but feeling in their candor. She met their sincerity with grace, refusing to let bitterness dictate her response. Jordan stood by her side, a steadfast friend, as the office slowly transformed from a battlefield into a space of cautious cooperation. Most significant was the change in Amelia herself. The woman who had once shrunk beneath the weight of hurtful words now carried herself with renewed strength. She spoke up during meetings, her voice clear and confident. Projects that had previously been denied to her were now entrusted under her guidance. It was not just restitution, but a reclamation of her worth. Outside work, Amelia found unexpected joy in helping others who had quietly battled their own internal struggles. She volunteered to mentor new employees, sharing her story with empathy and encouraging open dialogue. The humiliation she had endured had not hardened her. It had fostered a profound compassion and a desire to build others up. Late one evening, as she walked home under the glow of city lights, Amelia felt a deep, satisfying calm. The journey had been arduous, filled with pain and uncertainty, but through it all she had discovered something invaluable: her own voice and the power it held. Justice had been served not through vengeance, but through courage and truth. The experience left a lasting impact on everyone involved, sparking long overdue conversations about fairness and respect in the workplace. Amelia's story stands as a reminder that even when cast into darkness, we possess an inner light capable of guiding us through. Strength is not the absence of struggle, but the will to rise after falling, to turn vulnerability into power. When you find yourself at a crossroads, remember that reclaiming your dignity can change not only your life, but the lives of those around you. What feels like an ending may very well be the start of your strongest chapter. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of quiet determination and careful planning. Amelia and Jordan met in secret, poring over emails, overheard conversations, and subtle hints that revealed the dark undercurrents running through their workplace. Every document they uncovered felt like a spark, igniting a fire that had been smoldering beneath the surface for far too long. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, turning the sky a bruised purple, Amelia sat across from Jordan in a small cafe, her hands trembling slightly as she held a folder thick with evidence. The usual noise faded into the background as she focused on the weight of what they'd assembled. A dossier exposing the manipulations, deliberate rumor-mongering, and discriminatory decisions that had poisoned their office environment. Jordan leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "This is it, Amelia. This is what will change everything. When we present this to HR, and if that doesn't work to the board, it will be impossible for them to ignore." But Amelia's mind fluttered with doubt. Could she really stand up after everything? The scorn, the isolation, the relentless whispers, but now armed with truth? Her heart ached from the fear of being dismissed once again, or worse, retaliated against. Yet beneath the fear flickered a resilient flame. This was more than personal now. It was about justice for herself and those who had been ripped down quietly. On the day they decided to confront the powers that be, Amelia arrived early. The office felt colder somehow, the usual hustle replaced by an uneasy silence, as if the walls themselves sensed an impending upheaval. Jordan stood by her side, his presence a steady anchor. As Amelia presented their findings to the HR director and the senior managers, voices that were once sharp with mockery and disdain softened with disbelief. Faces that had sneered at her trembled with exposure. Whispers turned into awkward silences as the magnitude of the evidence left the room heavy with tension. One of her fiercest critics, a woman who had orchestrated much of the humiliation, sat rigid, her confidence shattered. Attempts to downplay their accusations crumbled under the relentless clarity of Amelia's facts and calm resolve. The ripple effects were immediate. Internal investigations launched, apologies surfaced where silence had reigned, and for the first time, Amelia felt a cautious respect bubbling from some of her colleagues. No longer was she the invisible target, but a catalyst for overdue change. Outside the office, news of the scandal began to spread. Amelia found herself an unexpected hero in whispers throughout the building. Some stopped to offer a nod of recognition. Others kept their distance, wary of the shift in power. Yet most astonishing was the message she received from a junior employee she barely knew, thanking her for the courage to speak out, someone who had suffered quietly for years. Despite the progress, Amelia remained humble, aware that the fight wasn't over. She knew healing, both hers and the company's, would take time. But for the first time, she met her reflection in the mirror, not with shame, but with quiet pride. This turning point reminded her, and all who watched, that sometimes the most powerful victories come from steadfast truth and unexpected allies. When we dare to confront darkness with courage and clarity, the tides of injustice can begin to turn. If you're wrestling with unfair battles in your own life, remember that you don't have to face them alone. Reach out, seek those who quietly stand with you. Together, even the most daunting challenges become conquerable.